hangar's master sergeant sneered, handing the specialist a mop. "Start with the floor." But he failed to notice the visiting colonel watching her, recognizing a posture he hadn't seen since his days at the black sites. The air in the hangar was thick with the acrid smell of ozone, jet fuel, and the bitter scent of burnt coffee, the perfume of a crisis in motion. At its heart stood the source of the chaos, the monolithic steel door of the primary weapons cage. Its brand-new Aegis 7EM P-lock system, a marvel of impenetrable security, was now an impenetrable prison. A single, mocking red light pulsed on its control panel, a digital heartbeat for a multi-million-dollar failure. For 3 agonizing hours, Master Sergeant Riggs and his team had thrown everything they had at it. Diagnostics, power cycles, remote override attempts, all had shattered against the system's silent, digital wall. Riggs, a man who built his authority on the bedrock of technical manuals and unshakable procedure, felt his frustration curdling into a personal affront. His world was one of flowcharts and certainties, and this machine was violating the natural order. The arrival of the dispatched specialist did nothing to soothe his temper. He had expected a team of engineers with cases of diagnostic gear. Instead, he got a single woman. She was around 30, with pale skin and unassuming features, lost inside a set of charcoal-gray technician's coveralls that bore no name, no rank, no insignia of any kind. With her worn-out sleeves and quiet demeanor, she looked less like an elite troubleshooter and more like a contractor who'd taken a wrong turn. Riggs's contempt was immediate and absolute. This was the solution Command had sent. This quiet, anonymous woman. It was an insult to his domain. "We don't need another janitor. We need a technician." Riggs's voice sliced through the tense air, heavy with sarcasm. "But since you're already here, you can start with that floor." He thrust a worn wooden mop handle toward her. A few of the younger airmen, eager to curry favor with the man who dictated their daily existence, let out a few stifled snickers. They exchanged gleeful, knowing glances, silently mocking the absurdity of the scene. The woman said nothing. She didn't look at Riggs. She didn't acknowledge the wave of ridicule. Her gaze was fixed on the defiant steel door across the hangar. She simply reached out and took the mop. But across the hangar, Colonel Vance, a visiting flag officer there to oversee the launch preparations, paused. His face, a roadmap of desert deployments and high-stakes operations, was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp. He watched the way her fingers, unadorned, no polish, no rings, curled around the worn wood. It wasn't a grip of resignation. It was precise, controlled. He saw the way she stood, not slumped in defeat but perfectly balanced, her weight distributed with an economy of posture he hadn't seen in 20 years. It was a flicker of something ancient, something disciplined. Her fingers didn't just wrap around the handle, they seemed to be reading it, assessing its weight and balance with the unconscious expertise of a concert pianist touching the keys. The quiet professional simply turned and began to work, leaving Riggs standing in a cloud of his own arrogance. The rhythmic swish-slap of the mop head on the polished concrete became the only sound in a room thick with unspoken judgment. But the way she mopped was wrong. It was unsettling. She wasn't cleaning, she was executing a pattern. Her movements were devoid of wasted motion, her lines perfectly straight, her turns crisp and impossibly efficient. She moved like a human CNC machine, carving perfect, zero-overlap arcs on the floor. The water she laid down evaporated in seconds, leaving no streaks, no residue, just a pristine surface. It was the calm of a deep ocean, a placid surface hiding unknowable power. Master Sergeant Riggs watched, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. He had intended the act as a public humiliation, a way to assert his dominance. But her silent, methodical precision turned the tables. It wasn't the act of someone shamed, it was the act of someone waiting. The quiet confidence she exuded was more unnerving than any angry retort could have been. It made him feel like the one being watched, being judged. The pressure in the hangar mounted with every passing minute. The mission was on a hard timeline, tied to non-negotiable satellite trajectories. Colonel Vance walked over to Riggs, his boots echoing with quiet authority. "Master Sergeant," Vance's voice was low but cut through the tension like a razor. "Status report. We have a 12-minute window to link up with the Caspian Eye. If we can't get those targeting pods loaded onto the Predator drones before that window closes, we lose intel superiority in the entire theater for the next 48 hours. He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Is the specialist you requested making any progress?" The question was a command disguised as a query. Riggs felt his face flush with heat. He had to admit failure in front of a full-bird colonel. His jaw tightened. He turned and barked across the hangar, his voice a desperate attempt to reclaim his authority. "All right, specialist." "Fun time's over," he yelled, the word specialist dripping with venom. "Get over here and let's see what infinite wisdom command sent us." The woman stopped mopping. She didn't hurry. She carefully placed the mop against the wall, ensuring it was perfectly upright and secure, a final, small act of precision that grated on Riggs's nerves. Then, she turned and walked towards the silent steel monolith. She carried no tools, no diagnostic tablet, no equipment of any kind. Her hands were empty, shoved casually into the pockets of her coveralls as if she were going for a stroll. The hangar fell into a deafening silence, broken only by the low hum of the ventilation system. Dr. Ares Morgan approached the Aegis 7 door. She didn't even glance at the unresponsive digital keypad that had been the focus of 3 hours of frantic effort. Instead, she stood before the massive plate of steel, her eyes scanning the seams where it met the reinforced frame. The assembled airmen watched, their skepticism warring with a burgeoning curiosity. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind a diver takes before plunging into the abyss. Then, in a smooth, unhurried motion, she began to push up the loose, charcoal-gray sleeves of her coveralls. It was a simple, practical gesture, the kind anyone would make before getting to work. But as the fabric slid up her right forearm, the atmosphere in the hangar instantly changed. There, on the pale skin of her inner arm, was a tattoo. But it wasn't some generic tribal band or faded insignia. It was a breathtakingly complex sigil, a circular design woven from what looked like black, geometric circuit pathways and impossibly fine lines. It seemed to absorb the light, possessing a strange, non-metallic depth. It was both ancient and futuristic, an emblem of profound, secret knowledge. It was the Cerberus Sigil. Riggs saw it and scoffed under his breath, dismissing it as some rebellious affectation. Great. Just what we need. But a few meters away, Colonel Vance went rigid. His breath caught in his throat. The casual curiosity on his face vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, undiluted shock. His eyes were locked onto the sigil, his mind racing through 2 decades of classified briefings and redacted after-action reports. The airmen closest to him saw the colonel's reaction and a ripple of genuine alarm spread through their ranks. They didn't know what the symbol meant, but they knew their colonel did, and it terrified him. The power in the room had just tilted on an invisible axis. Unfazed by the stares, Morgan placed her bare fingertips on the cold metal surface, not as a caress, but as a seismograph reading a fault line. Her head was perfectly still, her breathing slow and even. Then she began. It was not a code, it was a rhythm. A series of soft but firm taps with the heel of her hand on the frame of the door, far from the electronic interface. Tap tap, tap. Tap, tap tap tap. It was a language of vibration, a physical conversation with the soul of the machine. She shifted her position, her fingers finding a tiny, almost invisible seam near the primary magnetic actuator. She pressed one finger firmly into the joint, and with her other hand, delivered a final, solid strike to a specific, unmarked point on the doorframe. There was no loud crash. Instead, a deep, resonant hum emanated from within the mechanism, the sound of a massive tuning fork being struck. It vibrated through the concrete floor, a tangible wave of energy. The mocking red light on the control panel blinked once, twice, then died. It was followed by the sharp, satisfying hiss of equalizing air pressure. Then, a series of precise, sequential clicks echoed in the cavernous space as the magnetic locks disengaged one by one. With a final, soft sigh, the heavy steel door swung inward, unlocked. For a full 10 seconds, the only movement in the hangar was the slow, majestic swing of the open weapons cage door. The silence was absolute, a vacuum where snickers and arrogance had once existed. It was the sound of impossibility made real. Master Sergeant Riggs stood frozen, his mouth agape, the condescending retort he had been preparing dissolving on his tongue. He looked from the open door to the quiet woman and back again, his brain refusing to process the data. His world, a world built on the black and white certainty of technical orders, had just been shattered. "No," he whispered, the word barely a puff of air. "No way. That's not possible." He took a stumbling step forward, his eyes scanning the doorframe, desperately searching for a hidden button, a secret keyhole, anything that could explain what he had just witnessed. There was nothing. Just smooth, impenetrable steel. "There is no manual override," he muttered to himself, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "There is no physical bypass. It's a closed system." The woman simply stood by the now open door, her work done. She hadn't broken the lock. She had communed with it, using a secret language that Riggs, for all his authority and expertise, didn't know existed. The foundation of his reality had crumbled, replaced by a whisper of competence he could not comprehend. The airmen stared, their faces a mixture of awe and raw fear. They weren't just looking at a technician anymore. They were looking at something else entirely. Colonel Vance moved first. He strode past the shell-shocked Riggs, his eyes locked on Dr. Morgan. The flicker of curiosity had been replaced by a profound, almost reverent respect. He stopped directly in front of her, ignoring the now accessible weaponry. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of revelation across the silent hangar. He didn't look at her face, he looked at the sigil on her arm. "The Cerberus Sigil," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and confirmation. "They really gave it to you. I thought it was just a legend, a ghost story they told at Langley." He finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "Only the chief architect of a Project Cerberus system is authorized to bear its sigil." He turned to his aide, a young captain holding a data slate. "Captain, pull up the file for our dispatched specialist. Authorization code, Sierra Tango November 6. The captain's fingers flew across the screen. He had to enter a 3-tier dynamic password that made his own clearance feel inadequate. The file loaded. The captain's eyes widened, and all the color drained from his face. He looked up, his voice a hushed, trembling whisper. "Sir, there's almost nothing here. It's 95% redacted." He swallowed hard. "Name, Dr. Aries Morgan. Clearance level, Onyx. Unit affiliation, unlisted." He paused, his voice cracking slightly. "It's just a call sign, sir. Chimera, dot." The name hung in the air, a phantom of the intelligence community. The captain took another shaky breath before continuing. "There's only one note in the special skills section, sir. It reads, Project Cerberus, Sole Architect and Chief Systems Integration Officer. The hangar seemed to shrink. The revelation settled over the assembled airmen like a physical weight. The woman they had watched mop the floor wasn't just a technician. She was the creator. The ghost in the machine was her ghost. She hadn't bypassed her system, she had used its most fundamental, hidden feature, a backdoor known only to its architect. Colonel Vance, a man who wore his rank with the easy authority of decades of command, slowly and deliberately straightened his posture. He snapped to the formal position of attention, his boots clicking on the concrete. It was a gesture of immense respect from a flag officer to a civilian, more powerful than any salute. "Dr. Morgan," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. "On behalf of the 44th Fighter Squadron, thank you. You saved this mission." The colonel then turned, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces until it landed hard on Master Sergeant Riggs. the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Master Sergeant," the colonel's voice was now forged from ice and steel. "Assumptions are the enemy of readiness. True competence doesn't always wear a uniform or announce its arrival. Sometimes," he said, his eyes flicking towards the mop still leaning against the wall, "it carries a mop, simply to see who in the room has the wisdom to lead and who is merely in charge. I trust this lesson will be remembered." The story of the incident spread through the base not like wildfire, but like a change in the weather, an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. It became known as the Morgan Protocol. In the mess halls and maintenance bays, the tale was told and retold. It was the story of the quiet civilian who broke the unbreakable lock with nothing but her hands and a secret knowledge, her authority symbolized by the legendary sigil on her arm. Riggs's punishment wasn't on paper. It was etched into the faces of his own airmen. His authority, once built on loud confidence, had been exposed as brittle. But to his credit, the lesson landed. He became quieter, more observant. He was seen asking junior mechanics for their opinions, listening with an intensity he had never shown before. The loudest man in the hangar had finally learned the value of listening. Dr. Morgan, for her part, deflected all attention. She spent an hour inside the weapons cage, her fingers flying over internal panels, identifying a microscopic fracture in a tertiary power conduit, a flaw no one else could have ever found. She submitted her report and prepared to leave. As she walked towards the hangar door, a young airman, one who had snickered the loudest, jogged to catch up, his face a mixture of shame and awe. "Ma'am." "Dr. Morgan," he stammered. I'm sorry." She paused and looked at him, her eyes not cold, but deeply analytical. He took a breath. "How did you know how to do that?" "With the taps." She offered the faintest hint of a smile. "Every architect," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "leaves a key under the mat. You just have to know whose house you're in." With that, she turned and walked out, disappearing as quietly as she had arrived. Months later, the culture in the hangar had fundamentally changed. Master Sergeant Riggs, now a respected mentor, often used the weapons cage as a teaching tool. He'd point to the smooth, unmarked spot on the doorframe. "That," he would say, "is the Morgan point. It's there to remind us that the most powerful system in the Air Force isn't the hardware in this cage, but the mind of the person you're about to dismiss." The legend of Dr. Morgan became more than a story. It became doctrine. True authority is not granted by a rank on a sleeve, but is earned in moments of crisis. If you believe true competence doesn't need to be loud, share your thoughts below. Every story shared is a tribute to the quiet professionals who get the job done. Please, comment respect, subscribe, and join us for more stories where silent skill triumphs over loud assumption.